Hello everybody. Today we'll be focusing on TOEFL Speaking Task 3, taken from Official TOEFL IBT Tests, Volume 1, the 4th edition, ETS TOEFL. Now, our job is to read and analyze this reading passage, and we must understand the main idea here, okay? So let's just do it very quickly. Verbal and non-verbal communication. So remember, always pay close attention to the title of this reading passage, because that's the central idea of the whole paragraph. Okay, next. When we speak with other people face to face, the non-verbal signals we give, our facial expressions, hand gestures, body movements, and tone of voice often communicate as much as or more than the words we utter. When our non-verbal signals, which we often produce unconsciously, agree with our verbal message, the verbal message is enhanced and supported, made more convincing. But when they conflict with the verbal message, we may be communicating an entirely different and more accurate message than what we intend. So I have highlighted this main part, okay, because here the topic is verbal and non-verbal communication, and here we can see the link between them, okay, and the result of them. So that's why we need to pay close attention to it, okay, before listening to a lecture. Okay, now our job is to listen to the lecture very carefully and take notes. Okay, so remember, the professor will focus on the same topic, giving two specific examples. Okay, so our job is to listen carefully, okay, and we must focus on these two specific examples. Let's do it now.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology course.
Last month, my favorite uncle paid me a surprise visit. I hadn't seen him in many years. The doorbell rang, I opened the door, and there was Uncle Pete. Now, I'm sure when I saw him, I said something like, "Uncle Pete, what a surprise! How nice to see you." Anyway, my wife was standing next to me, and according to her, I wasn't really aware of this, my eyes got really wide, and I broke into a huge big smile. She said I was actually jumping up and down like a little boy. Well, anyway, later that evening, Uncle Pete told me how very, very good he felt when he saw how happy I was to see him. But compare that with this. My daughter, she's 6. We were building a birdhouse together last week, and I was showing her how to use a hammer and nail. And of course, stupid me, I wasn't being very careful, and I smashed my thumb with the hammer. Boy, did it hurt. I almost felt like screaming, but I didn't want to upset my daughter, so I said, "Don't worry, honey, it's nothing." Meanwhile, I was shaking my hand as if that would stop my thumb from hurting, and my face was contorted in pain. My voice was trembling, too. So even though I told my daughter I was okay, I'm sure she didn't believe me, because she kept asking me if I was okay.
Explain how the examples from the professor's lecture illustrate the relationship between verbal and nonverbal communication.
All right. Now the TOEFL examiner says, explain how the examples from the professor's lecture illustrate the relationship between verbal and nonverbal communication. So remember, we must definitely present examples, and we must show the relationship between verbal and nonverbal communication. As you remember, that's the part which I highlighted. So we must show the link between the examples and this part. Okay, first let's look at our notes. Okay, so the professor says, I said something like, "Uncle Pete, what a surprise! How nice to see you." Okay, so it's his verbal communication. Verbal here means that he says something orally, out loud. Next, my eyes got really wide and I broke into a huge big smile. She said I was actually jumping up and down like a little boy. Now, this is a nonverbal communication, okay? So according to the second example, the man says, I almost felt like screaming, but I didn't want to upset my daughter. So I said, don't worry, honey, it's nothing. Again, it's a verbal communication. Next, meanwhile, I was shaking my hand as if that would stop my thumb from hurting, and my face was controlled in pain. My voice was trembling too. So what is it? It's non-verbal communication. Okay, so we've got all the necessary notes now. Now let's look at my model answer. So listen to me carefully and repeat after me. The article is about the ability of non-verbal communication, which the passage defines as facial expressions, gestures, and tone of voice to support or deny spoken words. The professor provides two relevant examples to illustrate this phenomenon. In the first case, the professor was overwhelmingly happy to see his uncle, and therefore he was smiling with his eyes wide open. According to his wife, he was jumping up and down like a child, and this convinced his uncle that he was indeed delighted to see him. In the second example, however, the reverse was true. While constructing a birdhouse with his daughter, he smashed his thumb with a hammer, which caused him severe pain. As he didn't want to upset his daughter, he said that he was totally okay, despite shaking his hand vigorously to relieve pain. Apparently, his daughter was not convinced, as his non-verbal and verbal communication were at odds with each other. Okay, so here, right, we should say the article is about. Okay, and then we should summarize the main idea of this reading passage. Okay, and that's exactly what I said here. And then I say which the passage defines as. So give the definition of, in this case, nonverbal communication. All right. Next, then you should say the professor provides two relevant examples to illustrate this phenomenon. Then talk about the first example clearly. Then talk about the second example. Okay, and show the relationship between verbal and nonverbal communication in this response. And that's all. Thank you very much for watching and analyzing this video lesson, and good luck with your TOEFL examination.